He was flat on the sidewalk, face swollen and shirt ripped, shaking like he'd just crawled out of a fight he never signed up for. Behind the glass doors, a chorus of laughter rolled out like cheap music from a bad bar. They'd tossed him from the building the way you'd shove out a bag of trash. Hard, fast, and without a second thought. Now he lay there, covered in dust, tears streaking through the grime on his cheeks. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that the man they'd been mocking, shoving, and humiliating wasn't some random beggar who'd wandered in. He was Joshua Anderson, billionaire founder and CEO of Andert. The laughter died the second the branch manager burst through the doors, panic written across his face. "Do you know who this is?" he shouted. That silence, you could have heard a pin drop. And it was the kind of silence that changes things. But to understand that moment, you have to back up a bit. Joshua Anderson wasn't the kind of billionaire who flashed gold watches or rolled up with a wall of bodyguards. No luxury convoys, no sports cars parked out front for show. You could pass him on the street and peg him for an ordinary clerk, or maybe the janitor. But by 30, the guy had built one of the largest tech companies in Africa. What really set him apart, though, wasn't just brains. It was heart. He'd started at the very bottom. Born in a tiny Kogi state village, raised by a mother who sold puff puff by the roadside. He knew what it was like to go to bed hungry, to be invisible, to be treated like you didn't matter. So when he finally made it, he made himself a promise. Andert wouldn't just be known for innovation. It'd be known for kindness and humility. To keep that alive, Joshua did something most CEOs wouldn't dare. He went undercover. Sometimes he dressed like a cleaner, sometimes like a beggar, always to see how his staff treated people they thought had no value. Now, it was Port Harcourt's turn. That morning, his private jet touched down quietly. He stepped off in plain jeans and a faded t-shirt, but that was just the starting layer. In a rented bathroom, he poured muddy water over himself, worked dust into his clothes, strapped on a wild curly wig, and let his beard tangle like he'd been sleeping on concrete for a month. In his hand, a torn plastic bag held one file. Inside, proof he owned the very building he was about to enter. From the side gate, he slipped in unnoticed. The reception was spotless, air-cold, the kind of place that preached professionalism. A shiny banner on the wall declared, "Building the future with kindness and innovation." He shuffled forward, shoulders hunched, voice low. "I want to see the manager, please." Sandra, the receptionist, looked up from her tea and almost choked. "Wait, what?" She laughed, loud enough to pull in the rest of the front desk crew. Catherine, Cynthia, and a few others turned in their chairs, staring at the dirt-streaked man like he'd crawled out of a ditch. "You want to see the manager?" Catherine smirked. "Do you think this is a charity?" Cynthia stood up. "Not even a cleaner. You go straight for the boss of a tech company?" Sandra joined in, mocking him, tossing out cheap guesses about why he was there. A sick wife? Begging for a job? He bowed his head. "Please, just a moment with the manager." They didn't give him a moment. One shoved his shoulder. Another slapped the file from his hands. A third grabbed his bag and hurled it outside. "You don't belong here, madman." Catherine barked, and they dragged him to the doors, shoving him out into the street. His elbow scraped concrete on the landing. People across the road stopped to look. Inside, the staff laughed like they'd just chased a stray dog away. Then the doors swung open again. This time it was Andrew, the branch manager. One look at the man on the ground, and his face went pale. "What did you do?" he shouted. "Do you know who this is?" The laughter collapsed into dead quiet. Joshua stood slowly, dirt on his shirt, torn file in hand. "Even if they're the most skilled workers in the state," he said evenly, looking only at Andrew, "we cannot work with them." Andrew nodded, heart thudding. "We don't just hire skill," Joshua went on. "We hire character, compassion. And what I saw today," he shook his head, "it's everything I've spent my life fighting against." One by one, their names were called. One by one, they were dismissed. And the cruel irony? The man they just tossed out was the very billionaire they bragged about working for. That night, Sandra sat alone in her tiny one-room apartment. No fan, no food, just the sound of her own breathing and the headlines staring up at her from the cheap wooden table. CEO exposes staff in undercover visit. 5 dismissed for bullying. Her name was in the article. Her face, too. And in a city where news traveled faster than taxis, there was no escaping it. The phone buzzed. She picked it up, One of the few small companies she'd applied to had invited her for an interview. For the first time in weeks, her lips curled into something like a smile. But it faded fast. She set the phone down and pressed her hands over her face, the weight of what she'd done flooding back. Morning came, and she scraped together the last of her money to pay for a taxi across town. She'd barely stepped out when she asked the driver for change. He waved her off. "That's the fare," he said. Sandra knew she'd given him more, and she needed every coin she could get. The argument heated. She stepped back without looking, and that's when a motorcycle came out of nowhere. The hit knocked the wind out of her. The world spun, then went black. When her eyes opened again, the ceiling was white, the light too bright, and the smell of antiseptic clung to the air. A nurse's voice cut through the haze. "You're awake. Thank God." Sandra blinked, tried to sit, and winced. Her left leg was wrapped in thick bandages, arms scraped raw. Where am I?" she asked. "General Hospital," the nurse said softly. "You were in an accident. Hit your head." Sandra's eyes closed as tears slid sideways into her hair. 2 months had passed since she'd been thrown out of Andert. In that time, every door had slammed shut. HR desks had her name flagged. Social media had her face on repeat, branded as the arrogant staff who bullied the CEO. Even friends had started to disappear, except for Catherine, Cynthia, Blessing, and Linda, the same ones who'd been fired alongside her. Now she lay there, injured, broke, and alone. At least, that's what she thought. The door opened. She turned her head and froze. Joshua Anderson stepped in, quiet, steady, a brown paper bag in hand. Behind him, her 4 former colleagues stood wide-eyed in the doorway. Sandra's lips trembled. "Sir, good afternoon," Joshua said, his tone calm but warm. "May I come in?" She broke down in tears. Tried to sit up, but he raised a hand. "Don't. Just rest." "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I don't know what came over us that day. I'm not here for an apology," Joshua said, setting the bag on the table. "I covered your hospital bills. You need food, rest, and time to heal." Catherine stepped inside. "Sir, you came to see her?" Joshua turned toward them. "All of you," he said. They traded puzzled glances. Joshua exhaled and took a seat. "When I walked out of the Port Harcourt branch that day, I told Andrew something. Morals are just as important as skills, and that's still true. But I also believe people can grow. People can change. You just have to want it." The room went still. He looked at Sandra. "You were cruel, yes. But I've seen cruelty before." What stood out was the emptiness behind it, like you were fighting something else entirely. Her eyes welled again. "I lost my father 2 years ago. My brother's disabled. I pay rent for my mom's shop. I was angry at life, and I took it out on everyone else." Joshua nodded. "We all carry pain. But what we do with it, that's what defines us." From inside his coat, he pulled out 5 sealed envelopes. "One for each of them. These," he said, "are letters of reinstatement. You'll return to Andert on probation, intern level. No fancy titles. No perks. You'll rebuild your trust from the ground up." The shock was visible. Linda's knees gave out, and she sat down hard. Cynthia's voice was barely a whisper. "After everything we did, you'd take us back?" Joshua met their eyes. Sometimes, people don't need punishment. They need a second chance. 3 months later, the Port Harcourt branch didn't look or feel the same. Sandra now showed up before sunrise, sometimes even beating the cleaning crew. She wore simple clothes, kept her head down, and always had a kind word for whoever walked through the door. Some mornings, she'd bring snacks for the janitors, small things, but they carried weight. Catherine and Blessing, who once rolled their eyes at visitors, now guided them politely to the right offices. Cynthia and Linda volunteered to train new hires in something no one had thought to teach before: emotional intelligence. Word got around fast. Those are the girls who mocked the CEO. And just as quickly, people added, and he brought them back. Now they were the most respectful staff in the building. No one was more stunned than Andrew, the branch manager. These women, who had once been a liability to the company's image, were now the heartbeat of his office. One day, during a youth empowerment conference sponsored by Andert, the 5 women were invited to speak. They walked onto the stage in matching Ankara gowns, eyes bright but heavy with emotion. Sandra went first. "We used to think our jobs made us better than others. That power made us important. We laughed at a man because of his clothes, not knowing he owned the building." The audience gasped. Catherine stepped forward. But he didn't fight us. He taught us. He gave us a second chance. And that changed everything. Tears welled up in the crowd. Sandra took the mic again. Today, we've started something new. A foundation for people like us. For anyone who was broken, angry, or forgotten. She raised her hand. We call it Second Chance. The applause that followed was thunderous. In the front row, Joshua Anderson clapped slowly, a faint smile on his face. The very man they had once humiliated was now the reason they'd found purpose. But as the event ended and the hall emptied, a man in a dark suit leaned in close to Joshua. His voice was low, urgent. Sir, something strange just happened at the Lagos branch. A woman is here claiming to be your sister. She says she's taking over. Joshua's smile faded. His voice went cold. My sister is dead. Still, something in his eyes shifted, a flicker of recognition, or maybe suspicion. The air around him seemed to tighten. Was this the start of a new storm? The city of Lagos slid past the car windows in a blur of headlights and billboards, but Joshua Anderson wasn't looking at any of it. He sat in the back seat, jaw tight, replaying the words he'd just heard. Kunnel, his personal investigator, finally broke the silence. She says her name is Kayamika. Early 30s, dark-skinned, slim. Claims she grew up in Bainway after your mother abandoned her during the war. I'm an only child, Joshua said flatly. Kunnel leaned forward a little. Sir, she's got papers, photographs, even a birth certificate with your mother's name on it. Joshua turned his head sharply. Forgeries don't impress me. Normally, I'd agree, Kunnel said carefully. But she looks a lot like your mother. Like you. That was the problem. Joshua had buried his mother himself 10 years ago. His father had never been in the picture. For years, he'd lived with the quiet loneliness of being the last Anderson. And now, a stranger was walking in, claiming blood. When they reached Andert's Lagos headquarters, a glass and steel monument on Victoria Island, security straightened their backs, staff whispered in corners, and camera flashes popped. Joshua ignored it all. Where is she? Conference room 4, Kunnel replied. He walked straight to the private executive floor, paused outside the door, took a breath, and stepped in. The woman stood as he entered. Tall, graceful, composed. Joshua, she said softly. Her face was a haunting mix of familiarity and doubt. The sharp jawline, high cheekbones, almond-shaped eyes. He said nothing. I'm not here to take your company, she began. I've been searching for years. My mother told me about you before she passed away. Your mother? He asked. She nodded. Her name was Grace. The name hit him like a lightning strike. Grace had been his mother's name, too. But this didn't add up. He had buried her. I buried my mother 10 years ago, he said. So did I, she replied. He remembered that day, rain hammering down on a cheap coffin in a small village, the still body inside. But what if she had left behind something he never knew about? Why come now? He asked. Kayamika reached into her bag and pulled out a folded letter. She told me not to come forward unless I was ready to forgive her for keeping us apart. Joshua took it. The handwriting was his mother's, uneven, emotional, real. My dear children, if you ever find each other, I pray you forgive me. I did what I had to do to survive. The war separated us. The pain kept us apart, but I loved you both always. That night, Joshua sat in his penthouse with the letter open beside him. If it was true, he had a sister. But the timing, it was too perfect. He called Kunnel. Keep eyes on her. I want a full background check. Birth records, schools, even fingerprints. I'm already on it, Kunnel replied. Then came the kicker. She's been meeting with Kelvin Dyke. Joshua froze. Kelvin, the same man he'd forced off the board 3 years ago for stealing millions. The next day, Joshua walked into Sandra's second chance office. His face was set, his tone low. I need your help. Sandra straightened immediately. Yes, sir. You've seen both sides of life, he told her. You know betrayal when you see it. I need someone who can read people. You think she's lying? Sandra asked. I don't know what to believe, but I trust you. By that afternoon, Sandra was sitting across from Kayamika at a quiet cafe. They traded stories, childhood, loss, abandonment. But cracks began to show. Dates didn't match. A supposed 90s photo looked brand new. And Kayamika kept checking her phone like she was waiting for orders. When she stepped away to the restroom, she left her phone on the table. It buzzed. Sandra hesitated, then picked it up. The message lit up her screen. Kelvin says the board will back your claim if Joshua resists. He has the fake DNA ready. Don't mess this up. Sandra's heart pounded. Fake DNA. Kelvin. It was a setup. That evening, she stormed into Joshua's office. She's not your sister, she blurted. But before Joshua could respond, the doors opened again. Kayamika stepped in, smile gone, eyes cold. Kelvin Dyke was right beside her, looking every bit the man who thought he was about to win. You're right, Kayamika said. I'm not your sister. But that won't matter once I take everything you've built. Joshua rose slowly, locking eyes with Kelvin. You faked an identity, forged family ties, and think you can take over? Kelvin's smirk widened. Joshua, you've always been too noble. You built with heart. In business, heart doesn't win, strategy does. Kayamika added, when the media sees me claiming to be your long-lost sister with DNA proof and Kelvin's backing, your reputation won't survive. Sandra stepped forward. We have proof, the messages, the fake documents. Kelvin laughed. You think anyone will believe a disgraced ex-staff turned charity worker? We've already rewritten the story. In the court of public opinion, we've already won. Joshua didn't move. He reached for his phone, tapped once. A red light blinked from the bookshelf. Kelvin's smirk faltered. This is Andert, Joshua said evenly. Every boardroom has smart surveillance. You just confessed, on record. Kayamika went pale. Sandra's mouth fell open. Joshua turned the screen toward them and pressed play. Their voices filled the room. He has the fake DNA ready. Don't mess this up. I'm not your sister. Once I take everything you built. Checkmate. Two security officers stepped in, handcuffing Kelvin as Joshua spoke. You once told me business was about power. I learned something else. Character sustains what strategy builds. You can't destroy what you never built. Kelvin was let out. Kayamika collapsed into a chair, shaking. I was desperate, she whispered. Kelvin found me when I had nothing. I thought I could start over. Joshua's voice was steady but heavy. Then why lie? Why fake family? Her answer was quiet, almost broken. Because you were everything I ever wanted in a brother. I thought if I had a story, you might let me close. 2 days later, the headlines were everywhere. Fake sister and ex-board member attempt corporate coup. Secret recording saves Andert. Former disgraced staff helps CEO expose high-level scam. Sandra's face was plastered across social media again, but this time the tone was different, praise instead of scorn. The same public that had dragged her name months ago was now calling her the redemption story of the year. That evening, Joshua sat alone in his office when his phone buzzed. The number was unknown. The message read, You may have stopped Kelvin, but I know the truth about your past. And I'm coming for what's mine. Duh? Joshua stared at the screen. The initials rang in his head like a distant echo. Duh. He'd seen those letters before, somewhere buried in the past where the air still stung. By morning, Cunnell was already on the case, files spread across the conference table. Sir, he said, I've pulled up every known enemy with the initials DA. Also traced the number. Burner phone. Lego silent. Discarded after sending that one message. Joshua scanned the files. Deborah AWOL, he asked. Former Andert cleaner. Fired 5 years ago for trying to steal software files. But she was in prison until last year. Doubt it's her, Cunnell replied. Joshua picked up another file. David A. Kinlaby. Cunnell nodded slowly. I believe he's the one. Early coder at Andert. Helped design the original prototype of our communication software. Left before the company went global. Joshua's voice hardened. He didn't just leave. He stormed out after accusing me of stealing his idea. Flashback, 10 years earlier. A small room in Kogi State. A borrowed laptop humming hot on the plastic table. David standing over Joshua, anger in his eyes. This was our dream, Josh. Not just yours. I know, but the investors want one name, for now. When the company grows, I'll put yours back. So I get erased while you shine? I'm not trying to erase you. But David had already grabbed his bag and walked out into the night. Back to the present. Cunnell said quietly, now that Andert's at its peak, he wants to tear it down. 3 days later, the National Tech Summit in Abuja was in full swing. Every major tech leader, investor, and journalist was there. Joshua was scheduled for the keynote address. Security was tight, but Cunnell leaned in backstage. Sir, I'm certain David will try something. Probably in public. Joshua adjusted his tie. Let him. The lights were blinding when he stepped onto the stage. Cameras flashed. 10 years ago, he began, I was just a village boy with a borrowed laptop and a dream. Today, Andert employs over 10,000 people across Africa. But this story was never mine alone. The crowd clapped. It was built by many hands, some loyal, some not. Some who stayed, some who walked away. And some are here today. Gasps rippled through the hall as a man in the middle row stood. Black suit, clean shave, confident smirk. Mr. Anderson. David A. Kinlaby's voice carried easily. Will you tell the world that Andert's original code was mine? That you erased me, sold my dream, and left me in the shadows? Phones went up. Journalists leaned forward. Joshua didn't flinch. David, welcome back. Murmurs spread. You're right. You helped build the original idea. And yes, you walked away. But I never erased you. He reached into his jacket. In our original partnership agreement, which I quietly registered with the CAC, your name was never removed. Your 10% share still exists. The room exploded with whispers. David's smirk twitched. That's not possible. Joshua held the document up for the cameras. It is. You left in anger. I kept your share. You could have come back at any time. But instead, you chose revenge. He stepped forward, voice steady. I've given second chances to people who tried to destroy me, because people matter. Character matters. But what I cannot allow is sabotage. He turned toward the back. Security stepped in. David A. Kinlaby, Joshua continued. Our legal team has evidence you and Kelvin Dyke attempted to hack the patent registry last week. You cloned our signature product and tried to sell it abroad under a new name. The room erupted. David's face drained of color. 2 security officers escorted him out as Joshua returned to the podium. The only thing stronger than innovation, he said, is integrity. A week later, Joshua sat in his office, a new plaque on the shelf, Tech Leader of the Decade. Sandra knocked and stepped in, a small smile on her face. We just passed 20 million users, sir, she said proudly. And there's someone here to see you. Joshua raised a brow. The door opened, and in stepped Kayamika, no makeup, no designer bag, just simple clothes and quiet eyes. I wanted to thank you, she said, for not pressing charges, for giving me back my name. He nodded, saying nothing. I've taken a job in McCourty, helping kids in rural schools learn computer literacy. This time, I want to do it with truth. Joshua's face softened just a little. Good. Everyone deserves a real second chance, not a staged one. She bowed her head. Thank you. 3 months later, Andert celebrated its 10-year anniversary. The stage backdrop glowed with the company's journey and images, early code scribbles, small team photos, major product launches. But the real highlight was the lineup behind Joshua. Sandra, Catherine, Blessing, Linda, and other former staff who had stumbled and found their way back. Joshua's voice carried through the packed hall. This company was built with code, yes, but its heart beats because of people. People who learned, people who changed, people who rose again. That's why today, the Second Chance Foundation officially becomes part of Andert's culture, funded to help those who've made mistakes but are ready to rebuild. The applause shook the room. As Joshua looked over the crowd, he saw the faces of those who had once tried to break him and the ones who had helped him rebuild. And in that moment, it was clear his greatest empire wasn't made by being the strongest. It was made by being the kindest.